So I scoured an hour-long Autoline podcast and I pulled out everything that is applicable for Tesla shareholders. And I'm going to react to it in this video. And the discussion surrounds EV affordability, the survival of the big three, and the threat of Chinese manufacturing. Enjoy.
We have a lot of articles that are roundups of cheapest EVs on the market, cheapest new SUVs on the market, and those are always perform well traffic wise. So that tells us there's definite consumer interest in affordability. So again, I'm very interested to see what new vehicles will be coming out to address that affordability issue moving forward.
Affordability is clearly what consumers want, and so Tesla decided to cut prices and then go all in on artificial intelligence. And look at all of these job postings this week for Tesla Bot. It looks like the engineering teams are working 24/7 on Optimus, as this job posting is for a night shift. There's also job postings for the FSD team in China to get FSD up and running in that region. And now XAI is coming out with their first product ever, and Elon calls it the best thing on the market. AI is not just a buzzword, and in an interview yesterday, Elon called AI the most destructive thing in the world, and it's going to destruct the viability of the Detroit automakers.
I think the big concern in Detroit right now is how are we going to be able to make money on these electric vehicles, where we've deployed an absolutely insane amount of capital has been dedicated to building these new EV plants and battery plants. And where right now, as we've seen, there's just very, very tepid consumer interest outside of Tesla. And even Tesla, even with these big price cuts, they are not really seeing a huge uptick in volume. I mean, they continue to cut price, but their quarterly sales have remained relatively flat.
That's just not true at every level. In Q3, Tesla shut down production to upgrade the Model 3, and in Q4, they're expected to do over 500,000 deliveries, which shows huge growth. Website traffic is up on Tesla.com by 59% year over year, so the price cuts are obviously working. The one guy just said people want cars that are affordable, and then this guy just says that Tesla is making their cars affordable, but nobody wants them. So these guys are just contradicting each other and patting one another on the back.
I almost feel like there's been this moment of reset around the expectations for electric vehicle adoption. I saw a recent study that says that Ford loses about $60,000 in every Mach-E they sell. And then you layer on an additional $20,000 worth of government subsidy between the money that's given to the consumer and the money that's given to the manufacturer. So it's crazy to think that, as a Ford electric car drives by, we just saw $80,000 worth of capital evaporate before our eyes. I don't think that that's a sustainable business model for anybody. So I think there's sort of a reckoning that's happening right now as these auto executives are saying we need to maybe tap the brakes a little bit on this hard charge to electrification. The challenge of this is that this was never ever a consumer driven thing. This was always a government driven thing, and really the Biden administration accelerated that by lifting these CAFE standards from 32 miles per gallon to 51 miles per gallon in a 3-year period. And I just don't think that that was ever realistic to think that these car companies would be able to improve their fuel economy by 60% in a 3-year period. I mean, this is not, intellectually honest thinking.
Maybe the government just underestimated how bad Ford and GM are at engineering and manufacturing, because somehow Ford loses more money the more EVs that they sell. It's supposed to be the other way around. You're supposed to lose less money the more EVs that you sell. It's called economies of scale. But some of this drop in EBITDA is probably a result of Tesla cutting prices, which also forced Ford to cut prices. And we are going to see why America put so much pressure on the big three to transition later in this video when we start talking about China.
And so what's going to happen is that these car companies are going to be faced with penalties to the tune of about $150 for every 1 mile per gallon they fall below the standard, multiplied by the number of vehicles they sell. So in a recent analysis I saw, by 2026, they're saying General Motors would be staring at about a $6 billion fine. Stellantis, they had estimated around $3.5 billion. So the government means serious business on this issue. But I think, as an industry and as our policymakers have to have a more balanced view of this, because the last thing we want to do is to terminate the American car business. And I think there's real risk there today. And I don't want to be an alarmist saying that the car business is going to go away, but I do think that it's not the role of government to try to actually, put a massive financial burden on one of our industries where this climate change situation. I've seen a study that says that automobiles contribute about 13% of greenhouse emissions. So within the transportation sectors, it's not just cars. You've got airplanes, you've got trains, you've got all these other elements of transportation that contribute to that. And so it just seems to me like this greenhouse emissions challenge is a much, much bigger, complicated thing than the car business. But it sure seems to me, and obviously I love the car business, seems like a lot of the focus has been around placing mandates and requirements to drive this adoption that we're clearly seeing is not being driven by consumers at this time.
Well, actually, 38% of Americans are considering an EV the next time they purchase a vehicle. That's like 114 million people. So it's wrong to say that people are not interested in EVs. I think Tesla just offers a more compelling product at a better price right now. And as I said in yesterday's video, the Ford F-150 just had its best month ever. So perhaps EV adoption is not slowing after all. And as suggested by Tesla's stock price bouncing back this week, it seems like the market is picking up on that fact.
One of the things that's really caused a lot of Detroit executives to be kind of in a permanent funk is the fact that nobody wants to buy their stock. I mean, General Motors now is selling for 28 and change. It went public 13 years ago at 33. I mean, who keeps their job when the stock does that in 13 years? It's crazy.
Yeah.
But they say the voters are never wrong and the stock market is never wrong, right? And so the stock market is kind of made its judgment about what the future of the Detroit 3 is. And unless they change, I don't see them remaining viable for the long term. I really don't.
Neither do I, and it's no wonder Sean Fain manhandled them in negotiations surrounding labor, and now he thinks that because he got their wages increased at the big three that he can come to Tesla and get their workers to unionize, but there's just no chance because Tesla actually has a bright future compared to the big three. The workers are not going to want to give up their stock-based compensation in an AI leading company. So there's just no chance that these workers are going to unionize. If they did, I would be concerned about Tesla's future, but there's obviously potential and the workers see it, and so do we.
I just finished a report for Seeking Alpha on BYD. Warren Buffett had been watching this company since the early 2000s and then finally bought into it in 2008 and owned about 20% of BYD. Now Berkshire Hathaway is selling some shares and people are starting to wonder, what does this mean? Have they become disenchanted with BYD? I don't think they become disenchanted with BYD. I think they like it as much as ever. He has his own methodology for when he feels a share has become overvalued and it's time to take some profits off the table.
They say that on a typical year, these companies that build these massive vessels that will transport cars around the oceans and around the globe, the typical year there will be an order of about 5 vessels collectively across from all car companies. The total number of these things built is 5. Last year, Chinese car companies put in bids for 170 new vessels. So I think that speaks to their ambitions to take these Chinese developed electric cars and ship them out to markets across the globe.
And you guys, an average car carrying vessel, just guess how much pollution these things emit. If you had to compare it to the number of cars actively running, just one of these vessels, the same amount of CO2 as 50 million cars. That's just one vessel, and Chinese car companies just put in bids for 170 vessels. That's like 8.5 billion cars every year in pollution. Just 16 of these ships emit the same amount of CO2 as all of the world's cars. So this is why the American government is putting so much pressure on the big three to transition. We need to support the US EV market domestically to avoid depending on export. You also don't want to allow China to dominate the global EV market with their pollutive strategies. Last year, China accounted for 26% of the world's pollution. They seem to have no morals in their conquest for economic superiority, and I don't see the point of electric vehicles if you're shipping them around the world in these inefficient vessels. And contrary to Chinese automakers, I commend Tesla for spreading out their factories across the globe and for doing more than they need to reduce their footprint. Today we got news that they're building the biggest rooftop solar system in the world on top of Giga Texas.
Sales consultants for the longest time have been paid a percentage of gross. And at Cox Automotive, we analyze the gross margins on these different vehicles. And largely speaking, the electric vehicles across all brands tend to have the lowest grosses as we sit here today. So if I'm a salesperson that's trying to feed my family and pay my mortgage and take my kids on vacation, I have my choice of selling an ICE vehicle where I can maybe make a percentage gross on a $4,000 or $5,000 home run, or take a loss on an electric car. I think that there's probably a certain amount of that going on as well. And so it's just a very, very difficult situation for the car manufacturers because they don't have a lot of margin to play with, but it certainly doesn't help matters when the people on the front lines would be asked to make significantly less than what they could make by steering those customers to more of a traditional vehicle.
Okay, so sales consultants at dealerships make higher commissions on vehicles with higher gross margins, and EVs have negative gross margins. So it's no wonder that they don't like pitching these things at dealerships. And so what probably happens is those 38% of Americans who are interested in buying an EV show up to the dealership, and then the salespeople are not enthusiastic about these EVs at all because they hardly make any commissions. And so then the consumer's not excited about EVs. And so then these dealerships and sales consultants come back to the GM and the Fords and they say, these people don't want EVs. Well, it's probably because you're not enthusiastic about them in the first place. And that gets transposed, that attitude, onto the consumer. I just get such a headache when I think about these car makers transitioning. The only solution to me is to drive the cost of your vehicles down and get a higher gross margin. So your sales network is incentivized to sell your vehicles. But now you're scaling back your EV ambitions. So it's hopeless. It's dead, whatever. Anyways, subscribe to the channel, and I hope you guys have a great day.